I'd like to welcome you to our second class of the day. Elder Tanner is going to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on family history and genealogy. And we'd like to turn the time now over to him to present his material and instruct us.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence on genealogy and a little bit of extra about artificial intelligence, and some of it is probably going to be considered to be editorialized. But my ideas are based on the fact that I started with computers as I was getting a master's degree in linguistics at the University of Utah back in the 1970s, early 70s. And in addition to that, we've been involved in technology since the beginning of desktop computers, and I was very much involved and have been for the years since I owned a Apple dealership for about 11 years and had a lot of involvement there, and then have been involved with a lot of developers as a consultant and have been working with the ideas of search engines and artificial intelligence for as long as I could read, I think so. Since I was a great fan of science fiction, I've read most of the science fiction background of the whole thing. It's not a new topic, and it's not anything that people really need to get alarmed with now as opposed to 50 years ago or whenever. So we'll get right into it. First of all, just to understand a little bit about what it is, and I've put the parts in red that are important. First of all, it's a way with building computers and machines that can reason, learn, and act in such a way that they would normally require human intelligence. Now, when you use the word human intelligence, I think the better word would be human involvement. In other words, I'm not sure how much intelligence would be involved, for example, in simple arithmetic, but obviously if you want to do it at a tremendously large or high speed, then computers can do things even far beyond what humans can do individually, but they can still conceptualize what's going on. And so there are some still rather dramatic differences between human intelligence and what is being referred to as artificial intelligence. And it's a broad field, and it includes a lot of different things. There's not enough time in a 1-hour presentation to go through the entire category of things that are being affected by AI. Some of the things that are today are being touted as innovative, like the chat possibility, were things that were developed and that I was using as programs back in about 1976 through 80, 77, 88, right around there. So these are not things that that make you think, well, this is something that I've never seen before, because some of us have seen this for a long time. Another thing is that pundits, people who make comments when they don't even know what they're talking about, and science fiction writers have been predicting the end of civilization caused by AI since a book written by Samuel Butler called Erewhone in 1872. So how new is it to have somebody come on with a YouTube video saying the world's going to end because of AI? That was a concept that people had clear back there. What I didn't mention, by the way, is that most of the graphics here in this particular presentation have been created using AI. They're mostly, if not all, from Microsoft Creator, unless they're screenshots or something like that. So, and my own photograph at the end. One thing you absolutely have to remember is that this basic rule of computers is that they do not discern what it is that is entered into their processor. So if you turn a computer loose on a universe of information, billions and billions and billions of websites and records and things, and you tell the computer to gather all this information, then basically you're you're in the middle of the original problem with computers, and that's garbage in, garbage out, or GIGO. So when people start saying, oh, there's no morality, there's no nothing basis, no consideration for humanity, none of these things that happens when the computer spits out stuff. And the answer is, yeah, that's exactly what it's made to do. And unless you write it rules and are able to articulate those rules in a way that the computer can follow those rules, then the computer will put out whatever it happens to run across out there in the vast amount of information that's sitting on the internet. And so that's not surprising at all, and it's not alarming at all. My analogy is always when you do a Google search, and some of us have done and are doing Google searches on a daily basis, and in the hundreds, if not into the multiple hundreds of searches a day. And what we get sometimes, or considerable time, a lot of the times, are things we're not intending to find because we haven't specifically told the computer what we're looking for. And other times we get what we're looking for, and then we'll get a couple of pages of responses, and then 2 or 3 million other responses, which we uniformly ignore. And artificial information, I'm going to call it AI because I don't want to keep saying the long phrase. AI isn't really any different than that. If you ask ChatGPT a question, it will give you an answer, and it may be exactly correct, or it may not be. And an attorney in the news failed to check an AI response and used it as a brief in court, and the citations to the court record were all made up. And he had gotten in trouble, it got in the news, he was fined $5,000 or something and reprimanded for submitting false stuff to the court. Well, don't believe me, people have done that in briefs to the court before they had computers. So it's not even a very innovative idea to try to fool the court with something that's and not count on the court or a clerk of the judge going through and verifying all of the sources cited. So this is there's lots of stuff going on in the news that has fundamentally nothing to do with AI and simply mentions AI in part of going on talking about what's going on. So here's the rule. Here's my assessment, fundamental assessment, and I thought I'd start with that, and that's genealogical research will benefit from an increased use of artificial intelligence. It just will. Because why? Because it is an information pursuit. We are basically people involved in gathering, organizing, analyzing, evaluating information. And anything that helps us do that and be more efficient at it is going to help us in the long run. Now, if we went back many, many years, you can see some very spectacular changes. So 40 plus years ago, when I started doing genealogical research, it took me 15 years of going to the Salt Lake City Family Search Library, now Family History Library at the time, to do a survey. In other words, find out what my relatives and ancestors had already submitted on family group records to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which ended up in what we call Family Search. And that survey was monumental. I literally accumulated over a 3-foot high stack of photocopies of family group records, and then spent a considerable amount of time, over approximately 15 years or more, of entering that information into computer programs so that it was organized and so that I could see what had actually been done and what hadn't been done and what was correct and what wasn't correct. And what we have today, at least in the part that I entered years ago in the family search family tree, is response to what I did and what many other people did initially to add all that information into computer programs, which were incorporated into the family search family tree and into other websites. So this is basically where this came from. But with the online family search family tree today, if I were starting from scratch, like I did back 41 or 2 years ago, I could do the same searches in a matter of days or weeks and save a lot of quarters for all the copies I got. So that one fact, of course, encapsulates the whole process here of what's happening. And it does not take any kind of in-depth perception to predict that because of what is happening with the expansion of the search engines and all the rest of the AI tools that we're working with now, that our ability to find information and incorporate and evaluate that information in our own family trees and in our own research will be greatly assisted. So this is really the basis for what we're talking about here. And some of the byproducts, of course, are that I spent a great deal of my life in libraries, working in libraries, being a patron of libraries, involved in libraries while I was doing legal research, all sorts of different times where I've been very, very heavily involved in libraries. And now I can be in the largest effective library in the world, and I'm here sitting with my desktop. Sometimes I feel bad that I can't go or don't go down to my public library very often or like I used to, but anything that's in that library I can get on my computer. And so there's no reason to make the journey. That can be lamented, I suppose, from one aspect, because there are social and cultural and community type things that happen in libraries. But that's the nature of it when your focus is on a narrow thing like doing research in genealogy. And although we have billions of records available online, the question is, this is only going to be a trickle, a little tiny bit of information compared to what's coming. The amount of information that's being now through AI methodologies incorporated into genealogical resources is basically going to go from a mere trickle of water into a vast roaring flood of information about genealogical sources and records. And this is something that understanding that AI is much more than just the ChatGPT. AI is a whole field that covers anywhere from 3 to 9 different areas, depending on which particular person looks at AI. But in this case, what we had here is from Family Search, and this is from just May of 2023, and Family Search only, it seems like, infrequently reports this kind of information, but in this case, this is what was going on. And these are records that are coming from these countries. You'll see they're all Spanish-speaking countries, and that's the reason why this is happening is because of the fact that computer-aided indexing is based on artificial intelligence handwriting recognition. And it's also based on sophisticated computer programs that use AI to locate where the writing is located on the page. So let me explain a little bit about that. The first challenge was training the computers to be able to read written handwriting documents, which of course we run into any time before 1870 around the world, or even today, but primarily before that, there were no, except for books and printed materials, there were no all the rest of the records are in handwriting. So that's a lot of records that are needed to be made available. And so for years and years now that people have been working on it, and one of the most active was the BYU Family History Technology Lab, which was focused on creating programs to read handwriting over a long period of time. And I was kind of monitoring that and going back and forth with them for quite a few years. And the problem, of course, seemed kind of insurmountable, particularly if you were considering probably what I think is one of the harder handwriting scripts to read, and that's Old German black letter handwriting. It looks like just a series of little bumps. It's really hard to read. But on the other hand, they had developed computers up to a few years ago where it was being able to read that, even that handwriting, it had over 98%. Artificial intelligence-based handwriting recognition has now basically surpassed a group of people, the volunteers, in accuracy in recognizing the words. Now, the problem, of course, was once you can read the handwriting, you have to know what the handwriting means and what it is on the page in order for it to make any sense from a research standpoint. You just get a bunch of words, that doesn't help you. You've got to know where these words are and what their location is. And that was the second challenge. And that depends on each individual record that's being analyzed. And so why were all those in Spanish? Well, because Spanish parish registers, Catholic Church parish registers in Spanish, are almost uniformly the same all the way across all those countries. And so the task of recognizing where the writing was and what it meant, that this is a person and this is the place and this is the parent and this is the, so forth, could be done. And that's why it started there and why it's being analyzed there. But as they work through huge amounts of handwritten records will be analyzed and indexed over the next in huge quantities, in the millions and millions of records a week, rather than just a few thousand records a week. So that's going to happen, and that's what we're watching. We're watching these records come in a flood and being indexed by huge amounts, and this will just continue to spread. And so when you talk about artificial intelligence and use that term, you're including this handwriting recognition, which I think anyone who is puzzled over handwriting could recognize that it's this kind of an aid would be invaluable to be able to handle more than just a few lines or one document at a time. So then what does it do? What else does AI do? Well, AI fundamentally is able to organize, analyze, and extract information from unimaginable number of records. There's no limit to the size of the information data fields that can be analyzed and incorporated. The different companies have focused on different data structures and how much information they're going to provide to their AI programs, but the total amount of information that's in the world and in all the libraries is still available, and a lot of it is still locked up in paper records and not been digitized like the records in the United States National Archives. But that's inevitably going to be the target of digitization at some point. And when they develop some technology that can digitize those records rapidly enough to make it a possibility. So think about having all the records in the world, and this is an exaggeration to some extent, indexed and completely searchable. What if you didn't have to ever look at a paper document or any kind of record itself? Everything was completely searchable. Every word had been transcribed, and then you could look at those words. Well, if you think that that seems a little bit inconceivable, I would suggest that you look at a website called archive.org, archive.org. And that has presently got more information than you can imagine. It has over 38 million books, completely digitized, completely searchable word for word, and a lot of other information. And it is effectively the largest completely searchable library in the world. But how many people use it? How many people even know that it's there? So having all the records in the world indexed and completely searchable probably isn't going to impact any individuals very much, unless they are involved in a specific information gathering activity like genealogy. So that do you think that would make any difference in how you did your genealogical research? I'm almost certain it would, just like having the programs, online programs like Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and others all have made an impact and continue to make a great impact in how people do genealogical research. So let's take that thought one step further. Let's go a little bit further, and we'll look at what's happening already, and that is computer-generated family trees. Maybe this sounds a little bit much, and the question you would say is, well, how do we know they're going to be as accurate? Well, how did we know that we were going to have handwriting recognition? And how did we know that it was going to be accurate? That was a question all along. And when it finally got to the point of it being more accurate than humans, then that was a foregone conclusion that handwriting recognition was something that would be implemented and used. Well, what about computer-generated trees? Well, you might want to know that on Family Search, there are computer-generated trees. And this is a collection of family trees created by computer. That's down there on it's called in the genealogies section of Family Search. And there are some examples of how this happens and how it works. In this particular case, in Nuevo León in Mexico, the computer-generated tree took all of the available civil registration and parish register records, about 8 million records that were available from this one state, and went through that and analyzed every one of the records and created and then connected the names and the people and the places to the people into trees with showing their relationships like this. So the target person here was Octavio Gomez, and the rest of these people were pulled out of records that dealt with him and subsequent records which became connected to this. All this computer programming put together this. And the question, of course, when I learned about this and talked about it, the question was, well, yeah, but aren't they coming up with a lot of duplicates? And the answer was, well, what we tried to implement was all of the considerations that an expert genealogist would use in making an analysis, including cluster research, all sorts of other types of analysis, reasonably exhaustive searches, and the various rules of genealogical research that have been developed, and all that implemented in this particular program and then producing records. Now, this was done as an example, but I'm certain now today that there are some extensive, this is speculation on my part, that there are probably some very serious discussions going on about whether we want to do this or not. Do we want to let people do their own genealogy, or do we want the computers to create it? So by the way, that particular discussion has been made back in the 1950s and 60s. That was a very current discussion about genealogical research. So what do we do now? So what if the computers are going to do all the indexing? Well, that's inevitable. Let's just put it that way. But what we do get involved with is the review process, because regardless of how complete and how exhaustive the programming is, it may not cover all the eventualities and all the different problems that occur in handwritten records. So there is still a need for people to go through and look at the results. This was done with the 1950 census, when the 1950 census was done last year. And what happened is that the census records were reviewed by Ancestry and completely indexed within 6 days, when the previous time for doing the same kind of index was 6 months. And so then about another 6 months was spent in doing reviews of the information by people, but that still created a much higher accuracy in the records and in the product that was created than could have been created had people done the initial indexing. So how do we use AI today? I've already kind of indicated some things that may be available, that are currently available or may be helpful, and there's quite a few more. And to remind you what I said just a moment ago, and that is genealogy is an information-based pursuit. And so advances in the way that information can be found will ultimately affect the way that genealogy is done. It's just a given. So what about people who, what you might call, resist technological developments, that don't want to have to be bothered or use technology at all? Well, then they're not really the kind of people that are going to be involved in doing genealogy, because at that point there would be very little that they can do that isn't based on doing research that may or research into records that may already have been transcribed and incorporated. So one of the main activities of genealogists is looking for records to search. So that's part of the problem. You need to know how to go, how, where, and how to get to the records, where they are and what they have. So one thing that's pretty obvious is that online record search engines will now AI won't make looking for records and searching much easier. And that's what I've experienced over the last few months, is that I can actually ask questions. So the idea here with AI is that you start by asking questions rather than looking for websites. Okay, so you do a Google search, you put in your search parameters, and that gives you places that might have the information that you're looking for. But that isn't what AI does. AI looks at those same places and you ask the question and it answers the question to its ability using all of the resources that are out there. And so basically what you get is a much more in-depth, let's say, text-based type of response. So here was some of the introductions, and some of the companies that are using. Microsoft is very much involved. And so there was an introduction of the new Bing, the program from Microsoft, and also their search engine Edge and their website Bing. So this was the basis for it, and this came out. Now I always liked Google. I thought Google was superior to Bing, and so I said, well, maybe they've finally done something that's really good. And the answer is, well, actually, now it's pretty much a toss-up between Microsoft and Google as far as search is concerned. So here's the question. This question I ask is, explain how to do research in the National Archives. This is just a question that I've been asked. So I said, well, I'll just give this question a chance. So I put that into the Edge browser and in Bing, and just type that in. And then basically this is what came out in about so many seconds. But you can see there are still over 2 million results. But then what it's done is it's summarized it. So what do I get here? Well, in a sense, what I get is a Wikipedia type response to a fairly simple question, but in pretty much in detail. And the question is, where did this come from? And in this case, there are links to the pages at the archives.gov where this information came from, but it's here in a narrative form. Now, what if I were writing a report on this? Well, you could argue that, well, the report's already written. And to some extent, that's true. And it's also, if I were doing a presentation on this, here are a whole list of slides, or I could make multiple slides from the information here. And I would have had all my information done in a very short period of time. That's the point. That's what's happening. And we are finding out that there are lots of questions you can ask that you wouldn't expect to have answers to. One of my daughters asked the question, plan a menu. What should I have for a menu for breakfast menus? And got a complete menu selection for a month of all the different things she could have for breakfast. I don't know how many of them she decided to use, but it was pretty impressive that could be spit out so fast. So this is the kind of thing that you need to be aware that it can do. And then the question is, why is it set up this way? Well, this is Bing, and Bing actually created this screen just from my search. In addition, I went to a Google search. Now, what if I do a different question and do a Google search, and I say, how to access records in the Library of Congress? I want to know how to access records in the Library of Congress. So the question is, I could get a bunch of websites out there that would have information about that. But if I ask that question to Google, then it will come up with essentially the same kinds of things. So it's not surprising that they look the same, because this is what you would end up wanting to look at in any event. So here's the short version of it. And then down here with ChatGPT, there's a longer version of it. And how did this get into my computer is I looked for and got some AI apps, free apps for Chrome, for the Chrome browser. And these are Chrome browser apps that do these automated searches on everything that I put into a Google search. So what if I just want to know what time it is in New York, and I don't care if this comes up with a big thing like this? Then I can just type what time is it in New York, and then I can ignore all this and just look at the time. But in every case, it will start to do this. So if I search for, like I just usually do to get to the library, BYU Family History Library, I type in BYU Family History Library, and as soon as I hit that, it goes to the library. But it also starts to do this search and explains all the things that the library does and why and everything. So yeah, you have to get used to the fact that you're going to get like 100 times more than you wanted on simple searches, but it may be a difficult problem. But remember what I said at the beginning, and that is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. You can't on any search, you can't automatically assume that the sources that were given you in a Google search had accurate information. You have to sit there and analyze anything that you get on a search. It doesn't change when you go to ChatGPT just because it looks like it's saying something that's believable. It may not be. It may be totally trash. So basically what you have to do is the same thing you've been doing all along when you've been doing online searches, and that's evaluate the information you receive to see if it's actually true, first of all, and whether or not it's correct, and evaluate the value of it, whether it actually says what it needs to say. And so it goes back to what I mentioned about using or implementing it. If I were to just simply copy this and use it, and I read it carefully, I would probably not say it the same way. I would probably edit it completely out. I may use the basic structure, I may use the ideas, and I may use the information, but I have found very little except in very simple headlines or things like that that would be useful as they come across on with this artificial intelligence search. So here's something that you should always do. And I ask the question about whether I should verify the accuracy of the data used. And here, what I got was a list of data verification tests. And so it would also basically tell us what their limitations are. So these are the kinds of things that it can create very quickly and response. So does Family Search and the other companies, have they started? Well, some of the genealogy companies are already seeing the benefits of AI, like Ancestry, for example, Family Search, MyHeritage, and I'm sure Find My Past and many, many others are already trying to use or understand how it might augment and supplement what they're already doing with their websites. So this has been ongoing. This isn't something that just started a couple of months ago. This is something that started 75 years or 100 years ago and is now simply, we're getting the products of this in an accelerated fashion because of the advanced technology, the computer hardware that we have that allows us to use these kind of things. This kind of product like ChatGPT could not be done until the internet was invented. Until it was put out and became as big as it is, that allowed this kind of a program to have access to that much information. So there was nothing about this particular development that was surprising. It was just a matter of how much time it took for it to be developed. So now I'd kind of like to switch in the last few minutes here to the image generation programs, which I think are a great boon to genealogists, and the main reason being that we have, if you are actively involved in getting photographs from your ancestors that you may have inherited various and sundry. Some people get very few, some people get a few thousand, and some people are overwhelmed with the numbers of photographs. In my case, some of my ancestors were professional photographers, and so the number of photographs that I ended up with are into the tens of thousands and into the hundreds of thousands. And our families, my wife's and I's families combined, have generated tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of photographs. So just working through that is a tremendous problem. So we're using the computers to digitize that information and incorporate it. The one I focused on for kind of a demo here was Microsoft Image Creator. It is part of Office 365. And if you have a subscription to Microsoft Office, I failed to look up what the subscription, if you could get a subscription to Image Creator without a subscription to Office, but I think you pretty much have to be involved with Microsoft to get the product. So this is what it looks like. It's part of Microsoft Bing, and you have a field up there to type something into it. And so I've just done a little short video here that will show you when I type in. So I went in and typed in I want to see a man walking down a dirt road in southern Utah with clouds. And so after a few seconds, after I hit that, then I got 4 choices. I could have generated more, and I have an ability to download this particular image and use it. Now, why would I do this? And why is this an advantage to me? Well, in putting together these videos, of which I now have estimated of something over 400 on YouTube, I have used thousands and thousands of images. And one of the biggest problems, and the one that takes the most time, is finding these images that actually are not copyright protected. So I want public domain images. Well, by creating an image through AI, I have created something that is automatically not copyrightable. The US Copyright Office has taken the position that because there was no human content here, that it can't be copyrighted. And so I have an automatic public domain document that I can use in my presentations without concern that somebody's going to come along and say that I copied them. So this is, it's invaluable in saving time, and it will inevitably end up in my putting up more videos, because it just is, it's the product of what this is happening. And just that one thing alone, you say, well, I don't do videos and I don't need them. Well, there's lots of other parts of this AI problem that are coming up. And probably the company that's in the lead with this is MyHeritage. First of all, they created, over the last couple of years, they began creating a way to enhance and colorize photos and repair photos that were damaged. And all this is part of the myheritage.com website. And then they put it, and then they created AI Time Machine, which was the one in the upper right, where it generates historic characters from a number of photographs. If you put in your photographs or an ancestor's photographs, it will use those to create different time periods, views of each person, which is basically went viral, and millions and billions of these are now online. In addition to that, we have what's called Deep Story, which is a way to create a narrated animated video using one of your ancestors. And the script can be written, and can be written in any way, and you can choose all of the images that go in there. And the original image is the one that you designate as the speaker, and so that you can see what happens. So I hope that you can hear this, and tell me if you can't.
Hi, I'm Eva Margaret Overson. Here's what I would like you to remember about me. I was born on August 14, 1897, in St. John's. My father, Henry Christian Overson, was born in 1868 in USA. My mother, Margaret Godfrey Jarvis, was born in 1878 in USA. When they married in 1896, my mother was 11 years younger than my father.
Okay, well, you can kind of get an idea how this works. And so this is, it's really, we use the term spooky, that you can have somebody that is actually speaking to you and using that, all the information that you can put in. You can make them as complex as you want. And this time you spend in creating the story, the backstory, and putting in the visuals and the images that can be incorporated. So I mean, this is you might just say this is perhaps trivial in some sense, but the answer is it's not. It's a very deeply involving and very impressive technology that really involves people directly and emotionally. And of course, the stories can be very, very emotional and talk about things that have happened with your ancestors and relatives' lives. So it goes without saying, but I will say it anyway, we are speedily moving into the future of genealogy and a lot of other things. So these things are, these types of things that are happening. So that's the questions. And so we're basically here, and I like to make the note that the final photos in all my videos are my own images. I don't intend to use AI images in my closing slides. Okay. If you ever have questions, you can send those in to our email, and they'll pass those on to me, and I'll be glad to answer them. Thanks.